Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala syarafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, in the previous video I've explained to you how in terms of conditioning we are affected by all our surroundings, and how our visual, auditory and kinesthetic stimuli affects our shaping process towards attention span, and also how it affects, for example, our tantrum behavior and all aspects of our existence on this earth. So how are we affected by the visual, auditory and kinesthetic stimuli, but also how it is working in relation to our inner speech? Because based on our model here, we have this inner speech, all right, which is affected by the environmental stimuli and affected by the intra and interpersonal social stimuli, and this total aspect is then developing our human total sparse learning history, which I've explained in detail in many of the earlier videos. So if we are going to understand that, we have to understand basically the idea of some terminology that we use in for example, fading or discriminative process, and thinning and reinforcement of stimuli. So I'm going to read that part of it, and then I'm going to read on how this influence of inner speech affects us. An excellent analogy is to say that fading is the discriminative process, what thinning is to reinforcing stimuli. Because as the conditioning process progresses, it is often the case that the discriminative stimulus fades to nothing, while the amount of reinforcement provided is thinned significantly. Fading refers to the progressive decrease in the magnitude of the discriminative stimulus, and thinning refers to the progressive decrease in the overall quantity of the reinforcing stimuli received. To condition any behavior, it is often necessary to first introduce discriminative stimuli and reinforcers at an artificially high magnitude and rate. It is important to reduce this inflated magnitude and rate so that the behavior being conditioned can become under natural control. Every human interaction, we condition others. Just as we condition others, others also condition us. Most of the outcome of this ongoing conditioning are negligible, but some are lasting and perfect, have major impact on our life. Conditioning is a name for the various influences which are described by the laws of learning. They are a natural and integral part of our existence. We cannot put a stop to our influence on others, and we cannot put a stop to the influence of others on us. It is not wrong to condition others. The harm comes only when we condition others wrongly. This is where I'm going to describe of this influence of inner speech, of how we are going to determine our future in terms of for example, our worldview, our fitrah and concept reasoning to our existence as a Muslim. Concerning the question of what determines right conditioning from wrong conditioning, I can say that if in every thought, words and deeds we are fair, honest and positive, all our influences will be the right influences. Theoretically, every thought influences every other person on the planet Earth to some degree. I think I understand the process by which this happened, but it is very difficult to understand or know the degree of influence that we are impacting on this earth, on ourselves, our family, on this world. Still, I think your question deserves more practical answers. Not only do we condition others, we also condition ourselves. Our thoughts are the most powerful means in which we have to condition ourselves. This is where we use our input from the influence of inner speech. So we go into the chapter on the subtitle, the influence of inner speech. There's no doubt that our thoughts, or more correctly, our inner speech, has a much greater potential influence on our overall development than all external influences. The internal influences work by the same means and are governed by the same laws of learning as external influences. All the different type of reinforcement and punishment also takes place within our mental processes. Every term and concept I have defined and explained are also part of the internal conditioning process, and how we explain how the influences of conditioning took place unnoticed in most of the cases. So because of that, we are to use our approach in terms of positive Islamic psychology and the framework of Islamic psychology. How we are going to do this? I'm just going to skip and then say, although we clearly are on the path to perfection, we are obviously not close to being perfect. So in Islam, we have the fitrah, our journey in this life to become insanul kamil, to work towards perfection. Because in all that we do, there is some combination of good and evil. What can we do, though, is to maximize the good and minimize the evil in every thoughts, words, and deeds. Similarly, we cannot yet be perfectly fair, honest, and positive. In all that we do, even when we attempt to be fair, honest, and positive, there are some aspects of unfairness, dishonesty, and negativity. What we must do is to maximize the fair, honest, and positivity while minimizing the unfairness and the dishonest and the negativity in every thought, words, and deed. So this is where when every thoughts, words, and deeds, our V.A.K stimuli is affecting us. We are conditioning, all right? We are affecting it. But overall, the V.A.K is being influenced by our inner speech. So we have, in our earlier video, we have explained how our spiritual, emotional, and mental self affects our physical self. So this physical self, this P here, refers to this V.A.K, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, because this is at the lower level of our functioning. So this is a bit complicated in the sense that the nature of consciousness in Islam is an integrated part of us. Our epistemology is, we have our spiritual, emotional, and mental realms. We call it the roh, the akal, the qalb, and then we have the jasad. So even though the actuation of our external behavior is triggered by our thoughts are also linked to the higher consciousness in terms of our link to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through our roh. So because of this, our understanding of what we say and Islamic psychology is not just a physical, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic stimuli, cause and effect within the laws of conditioning of operant and classical conditioning and other forms of conditioning. Because the kind of input that we get are very subtle, and that's why in Islam we have to be very, very cognizant of the fact that, for example, within Islam we are being faced with this whole idea of, for example, secular materialism and agnosticism. That means you don't believe in God, and this becomes a dominant worldview now. So when you say that everything is just visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, and all these stimuli affects our shaping process, and we become whatever that we become, we discount the nature of our spirituality. When we discount that, then we are not actually having the full spectrum of our existence. So this is a dangerous trend in the 21st century now. That means more and more people, through the education system, you can't blame the education system, they bring this whole idea of atheism, or secular materialism, or agnosticism, and they make fun of people who believe in God, they make fun of people who says about spirituality and so on. But once we lose that core, we lose our nature of our being. Because if you look through all traditional society, their first basis is understanding their existence vis-a-vis this world and this universe. So if you go to the Aboriginal society or the Red Indian society or the Bedouin society, you can see of their reliance on a higher force. We can call that God or Allah or a higher spirit. Well, for example, the Red Indian call it Wakantanka, the name of this higher spirit. And they are living within that framework of a morality, of a law of existence that is consonant with our human existence. But if you divorce that, you take away all the spiritual, emotional, and mental aspects and say everything is just mechanistic, then we become a robot. Because what is consciousness? If you say that consciousness is just a program, a computer program, for example, some of those people who are agnostic are saying, okay, our consciousness is something like a computer program. It is, for example, information that is being put into our self. If that is the case, who is the originator of this information? It must be the higher being or the higher consciousness. And for Muslims and Islam, we have no problem with that, because the highest of all form of existence is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright, He exists beyond space and beyond time, and He is not limited to any form whatsoever. He created us for us to know Him, to understand our purpose and meaning and existence in life. So Allah desire to be known, so He created the creation. This is one of the hadith in which Rasulullah explained to us. So our existence vis-a-vis this inner speech to be fair, to be just, to be honest, are all natural values that have existed since human being existed on this earth. All right, so these are what we call revealed values, or nominative values that are good, that will bring about a good world, a good life, and a good existence on this earth. Because again, from the Islamic perspective, we are just all going on a journey. That means our inner speech reflects upon our future journey in the eternal world, beyond space, beyond time. So this is a precursor for us to practice the values of goodness, the values of Iman, believing in Allah, the values of goodness in terms of honesty, justice, fairness, and so on. So these are value systems which every Muslims must understand, because this is the fitrah. That means our inner speech is linked to our source of our existence in terms of the fitrah. Our spiritual, emotional, and mental self is the basis of this fitrah, which is good, which is always bringing us towards goodness, towards being the Caliph of Allah on this earth, of striving to make ourselves good, helping others to be good, making the world good, and so on. So these are the areas of understanding in which, when we just understand that if we talk about within the framework of Islamic psychology, we don't only talk about the stimuli from visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or enveloping all this is the influence of inner speech that comes from the higher consciousness, that comes from the nature of our understanding of our fitrah, that we have to maintain and develop. Because if we divorce all those things from our life, then we will have a lot of mental problems. That's why it's happening now. The rate of suicide, the rate of anxiety, depression, murders, killings, and so on. There is no limit to evil if you remove all sense of connection to your nature, which is good, and is all embracing good. The fitrah that Allah has given us to be His servant, His Khalifa on this earth, and striving always to bring this beautiful deen for ourselves, our family, and the world, inshallah.